Hello everyone, welcome to our last week together in Science 214, week number 8. We still have some work to do, and boy, I have some grading to do. I hope that you have learned the scientific process this term and how it applies to you, even if you're not going into science. I hope that you've learned how important it is to understand the process and how you go about researching a topic so that you understand the research behind it, and then hopefully you're able also to communicate effectively with different audiences about your particular topic. So let's see what we've got going on. Last week, you finished up your final projects, and here's a list of them. We had great topics this term. Several of you chose water quality because that's an issue in your particular area, which it is for me too. In my area, I told several of you in the discussion boards that we have a group near me called the River Keepers that test the Lake Wylie water to test for bacterial contamination, especially in the springtime. So that's important. Climate change was another big topic that several of you chose, and it concerns all types of weather patterns, etc. One person chose wildfires as a focus of climate change because, you know, in the past year, these have been all in the news, especially out on the West Coast, but I've even had them in South Carolina, so they are everywhere. E-waste is an important topic. I know this because I just got an iMac, a new iMac this term, and my old one is sitting right over there, and I don't know what to do with it yet. For safety issues, you know, my information, but also how to properly dispose of it. I guess I'll be finding out very shortly. Solar energy is not quite as environmentally friendly as everybody thinks. Though it is environmentally friendly, it's a lot better than burning fossil fuels, but still there are some issues. Biodiversity loss, we lose species when we destroy ecosystems, and we do so much of that as human beings because of development of spaces out there in land, you know, destroying habitats. Air quality, very important topic because of pollution, and so many people have breathing issues. Artificial intelligence and how it's used. Yeah, I've even come across a few papers, not this term, not with you guys, but I have come across a few papers that have been turned in that I can tell have been artificially produced because they don't look like that person's work in the previous weeks. And there was also the topic of shortage of teachers and educational gaps because of this. Very important topic, especially in the southern states, and I live in one of those. And the major issue is funding. If you don't pay people a living wage, they are not going to do it. They're going to move on to other jobs, or they will leave the area. And that's what I see in my state for sure. Okay. Then, for this week, I want to cover some terminology. Scientific literacy. That's our term for this week, scientific literacy. So what in the heck is it? It's where you are literate in a scientific topic in some way. And hopefully, overall, you have some literacy about scientific issues. So how exactly does this work? How are you competent in understanding some part of science that you need to understand? Okay, so here's how it works. First of all, you have to understand how science works. The fact that you develop experiments, you carry them out, you collect data, you analyze the results, you come to conclusions, you start the process over again and over and over and over and over and over again, right? That's how science works. And then you publish your work and it's all peer reviewed. That's how science works. Can you ever prove anything in science? You absolutely cannot. That is a very important thing for you to understand. When people come along and say, well, that was overturned, that idea was overturned. Yes, that's exactly how science is supposed to work. If we find more data that indicate that something else is going on, that's the way that we should look at it. We should always look at the evidence, look at the data at its face value, and interpret things in that way. So that's how science works. Then you need to have a basic understanding of scientific topics. Everything from what exactly is a cell? How does our body basically function? What's out there in outer space? What are the basics of chemistry? What's an acid? What's a base? How does oxygen move into our bodies and into our cells? The very basics of science. And you've been taking science classes throughout your education. You would know this. Next, you need to know how to research issues. You have had some practice at that this term. So you should be able to go to scientific literature in some form. Read it and understand it. And if you don't, you look up the terms. That's very, very important. Nobody knows everything in science. I know my little piece. Somebody else knows their little piece. Somebody else knows their little piece. Nobody in science knows everything. We all have to do our research when something new comes along. And then you should be able to communicate your findings with people, with everyday people, with diverse audiences, with experts, etc. And you have learned how to do that. You figured out how to do that, right? Because we have helped you practice with that. And you had to analyze how you would go about communicating with different people. And that leads to civic engagement. So what is civic engagement? That is where you have become scientifically literate in a particular topic. And then you go to do something. You make something happen. And here's my definition. Action to effect change. So you're going to go out there and make change happen because you know more about this topic and you know it from a scientific standpoint. So what kinds of things? You can change policy, cause policies to be changed. You can change laws. You can increase funding. You can protest. You can prevent businesses from moving into your area because they're taking up too much space. You can affect development. There's so many things that you can do with citizen science and civic engagement. So that's very important. An example, I don't think you can see it down at the bottom, but the recent pandemic, right? I want you to think for just a minute about how you found out information about SARS-CoV-2 and COVID. What does that stand for? Severe acute respiratory syndrome. Coronavirus number 2. Yes, there was a coronavirus number 1, and I knew about that one. It popped up first in camels, and then it was transmitted to people, but it definitely was not widespread, but we knew about it. And so what did that lead to? It led to a disease. Coronavirus disease. That's COVID, right? So I want you to think for a second how you got your information about COVID and SARS-CoV-2. If all you did was watch news shows on TV to get your information, you did not get accurate information. I'll tell you that right now, because it was dependent upon your point of view, your political standings, and just sensationalism that you got your information. And this is not how you find out scientific information. You have to go to the sources. Even if you don't understand them, you can find ways to understand that material. So that's very important. As a microbiologist, I knew about coronavirus 1. I knew what types of viruses these were. I knew how they worked. I knew how they harmed the body, all that sort of thing. But I sure didn't know how we were going to develop a vaccine. And so I was very, very interested in this. I didn't know how we were going to make a vaccine that was going to be super effective and that we were going to be able to produce it quickly enough. And then a group of scientists came up with this wonderful idea to take messenger RNA that would be found in the viruses and inject that into your muscle cells. So what the heck is that? Messenger RNA is a little piece of genetic information that codes for the production of viral proteins. So you stick that into your muscle cells, and your muscle cells start cranking out viral proteins. Are they making a virus? Absolutely not. All the parts aren't there. That makes no sense, right? You just got some little proteins floating around in your body. But then your immune system is challenged by these viral proteins and it's activated, and it can recognize them when it sees them for real. And there's your immune response. There's your protection. I thought this was the most brilliant thing I have seen in decades, and it absolutely worked. So then what did I do once I found out how it worked? I became civically engaged, and I signed up for the clinical trials for Pfizer. I was one of the first people in the United States to get any kind of injection in my body. I did this for months. We went through several trials. I did this for months. Now, the first set of trials, I was given the placebo. When the study found that this vaccine was tremendously effective, they shut down the primary study and they gave those of us who had gotten the placebos actual vaccines. So that was awesome. So I was still one of the first people who ever got a SARS-CoV-2 vaccine. So that's how I responded to this particular crisis. And I hope that you think about how you did this, and maybe you will change the way that you look at topics in the future. All right, this week, let's see if I can move my face over just a little. There you go. This week, all you have to do are the discussion board postings. Your initial post, you're going to use the topic that you made your final project on, okay? And you're going to explain to us how this particular thing, climate change, e-waste, whatever it was, impacted your community. And then why is scientific literacy so important for addressing this issue? Is that going to make people more informed in their decision making? And thirdly, how does interpretation of information affect decisions made? If you're going off some newscaster's opinion about something, and that's how you make your decisions, is that going to be a valid decision? No, it's not. You got to have facts. You got to look at the data. You got to look at the science in order to make good decisions. So I want you to take a look at that having to do with your topic. And then in your response post, you're going to consider what your peers' topic was and what they described as the importance of scientific literacy. And then you're going to answer these questions. Why is civic engagement important for their issue? What's this going to cause to happen? And how can people civically engage in their area for their topic? So give them some hints about how this could happen, and how does this affect your community? How does this particular topic affect your community? And finally, remember, that's the only thing that you have to do this week. I have a lot of grading, but you have discussion board postings. Final thoughts. Turn everything in by Sunday, April 27th before midnight. The course closes at midnight. It closes to you. It closes to me. I can't add anything at that point except I can do my grading. But that's it. You can't send something to me for me to put in because I can't do it either. If you want to request an incomplete, which would only give you a possibility of an extra month worth of time, you have to have completed successfully 70% of the coursework. And I have to check that off. And if I don't, you will not be given an incomplete. But if you're considering that, if you're coming down to the wire and you can't get things finished, please let me know as soon as possible this week. I have to turn it in before the term ends. And I would like to ask you to complete the instructor and course evaluations. They help me analyze how I'm doing as an instructor, and they help me improve. They help my team lead, my dean, know how I'm doing. And this also can affect change. Ooh, there comes that terminology again. In the course, in the coursework. So please fill those out. That would be wonderful. I want to encourage you to keep up the good work. If you stuck with me all this time, you're doing good. So I want you to keep up the good work at the end of this term, but also into your next courses. And I wish you much success in the future. If you need anything this week, m.sigmon@snhu.edu. Plus, remember my email address and get in touch with me in the future and tell me how you're doing. If you need a reference letter, just let me know. I'm glad to do it. do it all the time. Keep in touch with me. I love to hear from my former students. With that being said, I hope that you have a wonderful week this week.